Hello and welcome back to another week of the Politibabble podcast, where I, Archibald Elliott, as ever joined by my splendid co-host,
Oliver Sykes.
This week, well, who knows?
Hello. Nice to be back again, Archie.
I know, it's sort of regular now, and then hopefully we'll stay regular-ish. I put ish very much questioning there at the end. Back after our wonderful profile on Mr. Jason Morehouse, MHK, last week.
Absolutely. It was great to have Jason in the studio. Probably first guest in a little while, and certainly a first politician in a while too. So this week, I think we're just going to be looking at sort of current affairs, topical sort of issues, perhaps, aren't we?
Quite.
Because there's a lot going on at the moment, and I think it's just important that we, and
we haven't particularly discussed it either, have we?
No, we've sort of done a lot of topics recently, done a lot of episodes, and perhaps got to the end and gone, oh, current affairs, well, and sort of
out of time, no time left.
Yes. But it's important. Our current affairs are important to us here at Politibabble.
Quite, yes. Oh, crikey! I've just been looking at the weather.
It is rather cold.
Well, the snow could become heavy overnight Thursday. Oh, is that overnight till Thursday?
Yes.
Or is that overnight into Thursday?
That is tonight,
or
Archie.
Overnight into
Archie's
Friday.
been struggling with the concept of time and dates at the moment.
I have, yes, Oliver. Yesterday, when I was booking this podcast, I thought it was Monday and it was Tuesday. We're recording on Wednesday, the 8th of March. So I got quite bemused when all of a sudden I thought, oh dear, it's 9 o'clock in the evening. I still haven't booked a studio for tomorrow. And it turned out it was tomorrow which I needed to book in.
I suppose it's because you're living rather carefree, aren't you?
I'm not in the schooling system, so I don't really have to worry about
you
days of the week. I know the date. I know
Yeah.
the date we're on and the number, but not necessarily the days of the week as it is. Anyway, what are days of the week but a human invention?
Absolutely. Social construct.
A social construct, yes, like other people want to claim other things are social constructs. And yes, Oliver, what's our first topic for discussion?
Well, I'm not sure whether you want to go. I'll give you the choice. We can either talk about the Legislative Council election, which is the upper chamber of Tynwald, the Isle of Man's Parliament. We can talk about the election there, and perhaps a lot of discussions about its purpose and whether it should be an elected body, or we can perhaps talk about the Scottish National Party's leadership election for finding a new First Minister after the resignation of Nicola Sturgeon a couple of weeks ago, which was probably claimed by the UK's interference perhaps with Scottish politics in the with devolution in the Scottish gender recognition bill, perhaps. I think that's what sort of claimed.
Well, Oliver's chosen two choices there, and Oliver's not going to have any of them. I jest in most jovial sense. Yes, I think the LegCo, Legislative Council, LegCo for short.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a fascinating place to start.
One notable thing was that obviously candidates have to have a supporter or a nominee or a seconder. And I think there was either 11 candidates that got that stage, but one notable person who didn't manage to get a supporter or a nominee. I think you need both. Was Peter Carron.
Well, you need a proposer, a seconder, and then I think two supporters.
Yes, so you need a fair few people. So you sort of have to do a bit of canvassing around the Tynwald members. And there are four places up for grabs. One of the members will not be seeking re-election. That's Marlene Masker. And then I think the other people are Mr. Crane, Paul Crane, MLC, who's just who got the one year appointment, and as well as Diane Kelsey, 1-year appointment as well, because they filled the spots of Jane Paul Wilson and Kate Lord Brennan, who became MHKs in September of 2021. And then after that, Tanya August Hansen, her spot is also, she's going to re-seek election, and there'll be another individual, I think.
Well, the spots are really all up.
Is it
for
Mr.
taking.
Mercer?
No, he's on the next round.
Yeah,
So
he's,
the legislative council elections are basically split over.
I need to find out who this individual is.
Well, no, they're only 3, Oliver, because there's 4 spots.
I knew I'd missed some.
Mrs.
Yes,
Masker's
sorry,
stepping down.
Yes, I knew. I just didn't want to miss anyone out.
Oh, yes. Well, so the legislative elections, there's 8 members of the Legislative Council. There used to be more, and used to not all be elected by the MHKs. And they take place in 2 rounds, really, split. So every 4 years there is one, but they're usually 2 years after a general election.
It's to provide that continuity.
It's continuity in government. So, yes, as Oliver said, we have those 3 candidates who are re-standing for election. So we have Tanya August Hansen, Diane Kelsey, and Paul Crane. And then we also, we should mention the other 8 candidates, which are Kiri Jenkins, Connor Kean, Dawn Kinnish, Peter Reid, Marie Birchals, Gary Cluett, Brian Brumbury, David Prichter, and David Prichter. I hope I've pronounced those names right. Mm-hmm. I might have got the wrong pronunciation somewhere, but as that goes with my matter of speech, that's how I would pronounce them.
Yes. So it was in the public domain that Peter Caron was putting himself as a contender.
Yes, quite.
And it's most notable that Peter Caron has been a long serving member of the House of Keys. Stepped down after
I can't remember. He's
before the 2011
minister and other things.
Was it through to 2016 or yes? Anyway, I'll get Archie to clarify that. But he had ultimately, 30 years of experience as a member of the House of Keys, a politician, and he's president or chair of. Is he president of the Liberal Vannin Party?
So he was elected in 86,
mm-hmm.
And then was elected up until 2000. He's elected in 2012, 11 as well, and he stood down, I think, in 2016.
Right, yeah, 2016. I wasn't sure whether it was he did stand for 2011.
He's 31 years and makes politics.
Yeah, 31.
Yes.
Yeah, which I don't think that there's that many people who have done that, especially in recent years, who have.
No, I must say I wouldn't have been a particular supporter of him going into Legislative Council, mainly because of my own political differences. And again, that wasn't overly my concern in the whole election. I think some of the candidates, I must say, I've never heard their names before. So it will certainly be interesting to see how they fare, if the unknowns will fare well in the elections or not. And I'd be very interesting to see if any of the incumbents are unseated in the elections, whether they've actually been able to impress their gravitas on the Tynwald members in that for some of them, a short period they've been in, and for Mrs. August Hansen, she's been in obviously a lot longer there.
Absolutely.
So, Oliver, do you think that Legislative Council was a good thing?
Well, I think government needs oversight. I think that there needs to be scrutiny, but people would argue that that's the role of a backbencher, and that perhaps backbenchers shouldn't really be involved in government that much. And I
would argue, Oliver, by virtue of being a backbencher, they aren't involved in government, but there aren't enough backbenchers.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, so you're agreeing with me.
I'm agreeing with you,
yeah.
But I disagree slightly with the way you phrased it.
Okay, in what sense?
That you said that backbenchers shouldn't be involved in government, but a backbencher is inherently not involved in government. And as most MHKs are a member of a government department, I argue they're not backbenchers in the proper sense of the term.
Yes, but perhaps on some things excluding their department, they do scrutinise and they do pick apart government. For example, on the Isle of Man, with certain areas of the island where perhaps there's not quite investment, in more sort of regional, locations that backbenchers will sort of form a block, but also in other perhaps. If they're not part of perhaps health and social care, that they'll scrutinise that area of government. Obviously, they're not obliged. They can't, as part of individual responsibility, collective responsibility. They can't scrutinise their own departments.
But I still think that there is sort of always in politics. There's a bit of horse trading. So it's very much like, oh, you help our department out here. We pass this bill here. And then we'll help you pass your bill there. And even if you look at the budget, for example, the members can't, I argue, properly scrutinise it. And if they could properly scrutinise it, I think many of them would perhaps vote against it. But it's not in their departmental interest to oppose the budget, because the budget helps them out in their department. It helps the other departments out. It helps all departments. So by virtue of it being a cross-department piece of budget, it can't properly be scrutinised.
Yeah.
And even if then you look at the island plan, for example, it's extraordinarily hard for that to be scrutinised in the proper sense, because there's lots of members of departments. So there isn't enough scrutiny from backbenchers who are completely independent of government, especially as we don't have a party. It's much like in the UK.
Well, the party is Comen, isn't it?
The party is the government. It's a government party with perhaps a single sole opposition figure. But in the UK, we'd have all of the opposition scrutinising, and perhaps you have some of the government's benches, on the government benches in the Conservative Party, perhaps you have a few of those backbenchers scrutinising on particular issues.
Yes, yeah.
But they aren't really wanting to ruffle the feathers too much, because they've got the whips really breathing them in their ear and saying you shouldn't do that. And some of them do take the line, but if they cross the party line too much, they get the whip taken away, and they no longer sit as a Conservative parliamentary member. So that's some of the key issues, I think. We see, obviously, Jeremy Corbyn in the UK. He was suspended, not suspended, he was suspended from the Parliamentary Labour Party, so he's no longer going to be... He's a member of the Labour Party, but not a member of the Parliamentary Labour Party. So it'd be very interesting when he comes to stand for Islington North again, and see whether we see the current member for Islington North get re-elected or not. Fascinating.
Absolutely. So going back to the LegCo, then, effectively, should they? I'm sort of now. You asked me about the sort of backbencher side in government and its role. What's its role? Yes. In terms of if the role's still to exist, what's your thoughts on the public having some sort of effect on
I wouldn't agree with
body?
that, because it makes them again politicised. I think it would work better in some way. I quite like the UK system where there is a House of Lords, which I think it was a great shame when Tony Blair removed the hereditary peerage from the House of Lords, because it provided a very, very good oversight for the country, because people were born almost into it. It's like in the monarchy.
So perhaps if we're going to have LegCo people, in government departments, is their role to scrutinise the department?
I don't think they should be in government departments.
Well, they.
I don't think they should be. They currently are.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's. I think it's useful to have an understanding of how government works, and sometimes, like in the UK, the appointed lords now will have great expertise. In certain areas of government, they may have worked as an MP. They may have worked in government. You see, even the obviously it's different here. We have a tricameral chamber. They come together and sit in the larger cumulative chamber, Tynwald, rather than just LegCo and the House of Keys. But in the UK, they appoint people who have expertise in certain areas, which helps them. And that's perhaps what Mr. Morehouse was getting at last week. He was saying that it's very useful to join a government department because it gets experience within the realm of government, how it all works. And then in his next term, he was able to then scrutinise because he knew how it worked. And that might be something we obviously miss if LegCo aren't part of that. But if Legislative Council have actually had experience in government, that would solve the problem. I think if you had experienced people appointed to LegCo, and LegCo was not elected by the member of Keys, I think it would work much better, because it's we're in Keys, we want our legislation to be passed, we want it to be scrutinised in quotation marks, so it looks like there's scrutiny, but really there's no hold-up, because we can actually always overrule them in Tynwald the next month. They're not going to elect people who are not abject, but actual proper critics of the government.
They want people who are going to be on the government's side.
They wouldn't. I don't think they would ever say we do want yes men, because that would be too admitting of the fact. But why would you not want yes men, or yes men who give a bit of scrutiny to make things better, and then not really any stand-up power? Because LegCo don't really have much power. They have power, obviously, to read the legislation, suggest amendments, and send it back down to the Keys.
Yeah.
But in the end of the day, if the Keys want something done, they can pass it through. It's much the same like the UK House of Lords, except the House of Lords can delay it longer, and it still has to go through royal
They can
assent.
delay it for a year, can't they? Yeah.
Exactly, yes. And if something's really gone wrong, the House of Lords probably has quite a bit of sway.
Absolutely. So there's quite a lot of people standing for this sort of LegCo election, isn't there?
Yes.
Are there any thoughts on who you think will sort of get?
Well, I'd like to see Tanya August Hansen go back in. That would be quite good. And I also thought Paul Crane does an interesting job, but I don't know if he properly questions the government too much. I haven't watched much of Tynwald, I must admit, but I think all of LegCo sort of have their hands tied to some extent. It's sort of working within the system, because you can't upset your electorate too much. It's like the MHKs; they are sort of bound to what their electorates say. If you look in Tynwald, again,
so then you could argue they should become a publicly elected body, because if you're upsetting the public, then you wouldn't. Well, that's when there are ways round it. Yeah.
But currently the system is their electorate is 24 members. In the first 2 years of their term, they can't upset those 24 members, really, because they want to get re-elected. Yeah. But perhaps they then can after they've been re-elected, because they get elected in another term of parliament, where you might not see the same parliamentarians back.
Well, perhaps they should have a fixed sort of term. Perhaps it's 2 terms or whatever, so that they can.
But they can't. They still can't upset the members.
Absolutely,
overly much. That's at least my perspective on it.
Yeah.
They may differ. And we should probably get it. I'm sure we could get a member of LegCo on the programme. Well, we got Tanya August Hansen on the programme, or not on this programme, but on Youth in Election. Our radio programme we did in September of 2021. We did get her on to talk about.
We had a lengthy
discussion. Unfortunately, only able to put, I think, 2 minutes of a 21-minute discussion on. But it was very interesting.
Absolutely, and perhaps a new MLC who's fresh to it, and perhaps will say, what are you going to do? Are you gonna call out the government on when you see something wrong, or are you gonna?
Will that MLC have been elected if they said, I'm going to stand here and I'm going to call you out when you've done wrong?
Well, it's most notable that Michael Josem put out a post the other day regarding payments, didn't he?
Payments?
Did you see that? You saw that?
Post? Yes. Yes. I draw. Oliver, did you put some word for him whilst I draw it? So he sprung it on me. Dear listener.
So Michael Josem, was it part of his work?
And if Michael Josem, if you are listening, when you do send us emails, please do address it to Archibald and Oliver, not Archie, Ewan, Sam, and Brescia. I'm very much afraid, but 3/4 of the people group have mentioned have departed the podcast. Sadly, obviously, but they've departed. So I'm not sure if you do listen. I'd hope you do listen, considering the volume of emails. But I would ask you, please do update your contact details.
So, as part of Michael Josem's work for the Manx Taxpayers Alliance, who he can't say who they are, or who owns or who manages it. So,
I've got the article up now. So it starts off with the headline: Quid pro LegCo.
Sorry, can I just say it is on the Manx Taxpayers Alliance website?
Well, this is Michael Josem. He might have also published it on Manx Taxpayer Alliance. They generally do the same. This is Joseph, actually.
Ah.
So it's himself. But he does do other stuff on the Max Taxpayer Lines, something we will get onto in a minute. And I must say, we must bring Michael Joseph in here for comment. We must approach him for comment, probably to have our. Even though we're not a journalist, we can literally comment on anything and not have to follow the rigorous standards of public service broadcasting. But it's usually good practice, so we shall try and get him on the programme. So yes, he says, quid pro LegCo, payments from Legislative Council candidates to members of the House of Keys. It's a very Daily Mail-esque headline, because the body of the text and the article doesn't actually suggest that. So it reads sort of the following, that he wrote to the president of LegCo, Lawrence Skelly, asking him to investigate whether any Legislative Council candidates have made payments or so-called donations to members of the Keys. And he said, just 10 days, I quote, before wannabe politicians, wannabe, wouldn't you say want to be? It's a formal letter of writing, I take great issue with that. Seek appointment to the Legislative Council. I've reviewed the Tynwald website and see no declaration of any such payments or donations. I've listened to the media interviews involving candidates for the Legislative Council and heard no declaration of such payments or so-called donations. No, let me finish here. Why has there been no declaration on the Tynwald website in the local media of any such payments or donations to the candidates? Perhaps, Mr. Joseph, perhaps you missed the one key thing which, if you applied Occam's razor to the whole situation, you would realise. Perhaps it's because there are no such payments and no such donations existing. So why would they list something which isn't there and doesn't exist? That is an obvious solution he's forgotten to mention.
I suppose transparency is an important issue when it comes to elections, and I suppose it's a difficult thing. Perhaps would it be something you do in the run-up or when you're elected that you received such donations? If a member were to have, or an elected. If someone, a candidate.
Well, I think obviously if they donate to MHK, it should have been declared as a pecuniary interest, because it is a conflict of interest to basically bribe, and it'd probably be illegal actually if they were to. And I'm not exactly sure what Mr. Joseph is getting at here, because he's not provided any proof of any rumour. He's not even said, I've heard a rumour of this. Could you investigate it, see if it's true? He's just said, as you're aware, these candidates are seeking election. I'm sure, as you would agree, when seeking public office, it is important for members and prospective members of Tynwald to act transparently and open about relevant financial connections. And he's asking him to investigate any possible payments or so-called donations. But he's not said, oh, I've heard that there may be there. He's just said, I want to investigate this, with no substantial evidence of why Mr. Skelly should actually investigate it. So I think it's a very, very odd thing to write into, because I would say, if we haven't heard rumours of it, and I've certainly heard no rumours of it.
No.
Why would you? Well, you've got no proof of it happening. Why would you claim, oh, we must investigate this thing, when you might come up with, yes, we didn't declare anything because there was nothing. Again, Tynwald probably would have been better to retort and close it down very quickly and say, we haven't received any notification of anything happening. We're not aware of anything happening to that matter or that extent, and it would have maybe hushed it all up. But you don't have a hush up in government.
But he says all Tynwald members as well, doesn't he? Or prospective.
Yes. It's jolly confusing what he's trying to get at, because I think he's slightly wrong on the title of Mr. Skelly. It should probably be the President of Tynwald, rather than the President of the Legislative Council. President of Tynwald chairs the Legislative Council. Anyway, I think we flogged this one to death, so perhaps we move far ashore over the Irish Sea, up the country, over into the land of whiskey, and I'm quite unsure of Scottish... tartan, there we are, that's what I put as a classic Scottish export around the world. Any other Scottish... porridge, of course. Any other classic Scottish exports you can think of, Oliver?
Iron brew.
Iron Brew, never had it.
Never?
Have you had it?
Oh yes,
Is it
delicious, delicious.
What does it taste of?
It's kind of quite fiery. It's kind of a bit like, sort of like ginger beer in a way.
Interesting. I'll stick to the whiskey. Scotch whiskey.
Is it like
Of
ginger
course.
beer? I'm not too sure.
Ginger beer. Interesting. Well, we'll have to get some on the programme at some point.
We will.
Yes.
Perhaps next week I'll get
Yes.
some in. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I drive home, so we can't do what many, I use University Conservative Association. Not this is a conservative podcast. I think the only self-declared conservative, although not necessarily in the modern sense, on the podcast do host Port and Policy, which is quite a common one where it's discussed policy over port. I'm driving, so obviously don't drink and drive, my good fellows. So yes, the Scottish Independence National Party, sorry, not the Scottish Independence National Party, that would be rather mouthful. The Scottish National Party, the SNP,
who are aiming for
Scottish independence, are having their leadership election.
And there's been several attacks in this sort of election on the prospective candidates amongst each other, haven't there? Or is it? Am I right in saying that? I'm just reading.
Well, yes, there was an interesting analysis by the STV, which is the Scottish TV channel, and interesting analysis by one of the commentators there, basically saying if you didn't know it was the SNP and you're completely unaware of what was exactly happening, you would think they were 3 different party leaders from 3 different Scottish parties. They've not really appealed to the country at all. They're very much going in with the divide policy, and we saw what havoc that wreaked in the Conservatives. Except the Conservatives didn't go quite that far. They still admitted they were all friends in blue. Here, no, you would not believe they are members of the same parties. We have only one I can remember off the top of my head, which would be my pick if I was to choose the most sensible candidate, is Kate Forbes.
So the candidates are Humza Yousaf, Kate Forbes, and Ash Regan, as they set out their visions for Scotland.
Well, yes, Ash Regan's the interesting one. If I was to pick the best unionist candidate, I would pick Ash Regan. Every single time I would pick her for holding the union together, because I don't think she's overly good as a politician. I wouldn't have put her as... I think she had no idea what she was going on about when she was speaking, when she announced she was standing about how Scotland was going to be independent, and she said, and the interviewer said, but England said no quite a few times, the United Kingdom government, British government, and she says, yes, but that was a long time ago. They might have changed their mind now. And I thought, how's a long time ago to her? Is 6 months. That might be a long time in British politics, but it's been reiterated again and again and again by Boris Johnson, by Liz Truss,
and it's been
by Rishi Sunak.
And
reiterated again and again and again.
And the Supreme Court
said no.
And the Supreme Court
was it the Court of Session?
Sorry,
I think they appealed. Was the court? I think they all said no. Actually,
yeah. Which is obviously an independent body, which is sort of pretty clear that it's not going to happen. So yeah.
Well, the real irony here is there's so many personal attacks between them all.
Yeah.
So I think it was Mr. Yousaf said that I'm the only candidate who will stand up to Westminster's power grab, which is quite ironic. Basically in supporting the gender recognition bill, but it's quite ironic because if the Supreme Court rejects his challenge, he's dead in the water. He can't do anything because the UK Supreme Court encompasses the whole of the United Kingdom, which encompasses Scotland, it encompasses Wales, it encompasses Northern Ireland, and obviously England. I think, as the SNP keep on trying to do, they keep on trying to divide the country. We see, even in Westminster, the SNP leader in Westminster seems to think that the UK government he refers to, and then he refers to the Scotland is under a different jurisdiction he wants it to be, even though the UK government rules for all of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, not just England. I think he fails to recognise that.
And I suppose with the recent sort of Northern Ireland Protocol agreement, that I suppose Rishi wants to be seen as uniting the union.
I don't think if they had another election today, or it was a referendum today, I don't think they'd win it. I think, again, we're obviously talking the independence referendum, not the Brexit referendum.
Yes.
But I don't think they'd win it.
Yes, I'm talking in the sense of uniting the union
Of
by
course, yes.
by the government's
I think they're
decisions.
doing better on that front, but in other fronts, the government is. I wouldn't have chosen them as my ideal government. There's no metal in them left. I was watching a fascinating speech by the Earl of Stockton, who I think is now deceased, Harold Macmillan, who's then, by Margaret Thatcher, elevated into the Lords, creating him the Earldom of Stockton. And it was a very good speech by him, and I thought that, you look at the calibre of statesmen we had, the calibre of politicians, and you look at the very slippery slope we've gone down to overly corporatised politicians who don't, I think, have real mettle, real determination to actually get anything done. They're just really just men in shiny suits who just sit there and wear ties that are far, far too thin.
Yeah.
Far too. It's a very. It's a silly point of.
I like
is
a
it,
thin. A thick tie.
It's a very pedantic point of me, and I'm sure Margaret Thatcher will have my head, because once you revert to personal attacks, you lose any credibility. But they wear ties which is too thin.
Ooh.
It's a good thickness of tie. Yes.
Not. Rishi's is way too thin.
Rishi's is. You see, I'd still describe that
tie
as.
should also be quite.
I still describe that as a thin tie, but it's a suitable amount of thinness. It's not overtly. There's no camera here, you can't see it. But it's not an overt amount of. That's I suppose a suitable, good tie. But you see, even like Tom Harwood, a GB News presenter, political commentator, he was on Question Time last week or something, and his tie was literally the width of 2 fingers. It was so inordinately thin, you can't get a proper knot on it, and it looks dreadful.
At least Sir Keir has a better dress sense than Mr. Corbyn.
Well, when saying that, I actually thought Mr. Corbyn's dress sense was better than Sir Keir's.
1 second.
I'm very sorry, I agree. I do think that. One.
Vital. I'll ask my mother. Oh, I think I know what my mother would say. I think she'd look across the dispatch box and she'd say, put on a proper suit, do up your tie, and sing the national anthem.
I mean, I can agree with the sentiment posed by David Cameron. I don't agree that Corbyn's dress sense was good and suitable for Parliament, but I say it was better than Keir Starmer. I find Keir Starmer far too drab. It doesn't seem smart. It doesn't seem to put together. It seems like your average corporate office, really. And perhaps that's where it's come from. And politicians haven't always had the sense of style. But you go back to the last century, they look a lot better put together than they did now. They'd actually wear proper suits with, I'd argue, proper lapel widths and actually proper shirts as well.
Yes, it is interesting, and it's also like it especially sparked in the sort of Liz Truss era about the podiums, the lecterns.
Oh yes,
do you remember?
Yes. I thought it's silly. Just have one lectern.
Yeah.
Why do you need a new lectern?
I didn't realise that they had a new lectern for every prime minister.
Apparently they did.
Yeah.
Apparently they don't like. I don't see the need. I agree. A lectern's very useful, very good. It looks prime ministerial, but it doesn't need changing. Especially Liz Truss's one was like a Jenga puzzle gone wrong. Quite frankly, it was atrocious.
Which was probably a very good sort of metaphor for her premiership.
Yes, quite.
Yeah.
I do have to disclose once again. I did vote for her. I did vote for her in that fateful leadership election. Should I have voted for her? Perhaps not, but you can't change the past. I say look to the likes of Yesminster. I know it's a sitcom, but I think it perfectly encapsulates that era of dress. And I think that was, again, a good era of politicians' dress sense. Obviously, you go even further back. They used to... You look even like...
I do believe that we do have news in... Oh, no. It was just Jeff the Mongoose.
Yes.
Our good friends at Jeff had posted it's snowing, and then false alarm, it stopped, which was about 12 minutes ago. But we do believe that there will be snow, potentially.
Yes.
We're not too sure. I'm sorry, I had to breakdown.
That's fine. But yes,
Um,
I think it perfectly encapsulated the era. But we go further back. We go to even look at Neville Chamberlain. He used to wear winged collar shirts, very Edwardian dress sense, striped trousers, and a morning tailcoat.
And
really.
Churchill, he used to wear bow ties.
He did, yes.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
he started off office still in the morning dress. They'd wear their morning tailcoats and their striped trousers is a uniform and top hats. And you used to, and still, Betty Burstrode, who sadly died, the first female Speaker of the House of Commons, until she stopped the rule. You used to have a top hat to raise a point of order. Or point of order, you'd have to have a top hat on. So you'd have a series of collapsible hats they'd store in the cloakroom if a member forgot his hat. And I remember there's a fabulous video, if you look at Top Hat Rule House of Commons, you'll find it, of a Tory politician sitting on the benches. Or it might have been Labour or something. And he's asking, point of order, and he said, the hat, Mr. Whatever, the hat, you need a hat. And the hat, and then he threw it, the sergeant at arms threw it over. He caught it, slid back on, and one very slick move, slapped the hat on the head and said, point of order, Madam Speaker, and carried on with it. And it was very, very slick, it was very well done. And it made, these wacky traditions made Parliament what it was. We even look at the horror that was posed by Jacob Rees-Mogg lounging back on the chair, which actually is a good state because the speakers are exactly where his head would have been. They used to, before they brought television into the chambers, the front bench would put their feet up on the table that the mace sits on, where the dispatcher's box sits. It was very common.
Goodness.
But they're not allowed to now, obviously, because the cameras come in. They thought it was a very bad look if we do.
Well, we'd have to go down.
How politics have changed.
Yeah, the Tynwald Chamber. I'm not sure what. Obviously, they're allowed television cameras. Well, we do have IOM TV. Certain journalists that apply for a license, but there is no actual TV live coverage of it. There is
audio.
There is audio.
They all get their own desks in Tynwald.
Yeah,
they all get their own desks, and with a little they flap up, and you can store anything in them. It's much like the US Congress. In the Congress in the US,
and I'm pretty sure it's the same in this.
They have the sweet desk. Have you seen the sweet desk? So it's
No.
a desk where sweets are stored in to snack in the.
I'm pretty sure it's the same at Holyrood. Is it Holyrood?
Holyrood.
Holyrood or Holyhood?
I say Holyrood.
Yeah, did I say Holyrood?
You said Holyrood.
All right.
But I mean, it's.
And they have their own.
Are you implying
which
now,
is
Oliver,
the-
it's quite rude to be at Holyrood?
No, absolutely not. That's the Scottish Parliament, for those of you who don't know, and they have their own.
Dreadful building. It's another. It's very, very off the topic of current affairs. It's a very big bugbear of mine. Ugly buildings. It's an ugly building, Holyrood. It's modernist. They could have built it in a classical style, even neoclassical style, even Gothic revival style. It would last longer than it lasts. It would be better built, and it would be a better national icon. We look at, for example, in Oxford, there's St. Cross's College, which was in the news recently, and they're having to replace a facade which was built 2 years ago in a modern style made of concrete and glass because it started to have cracks in. But ironically, next to it stands a 100-year-old building built at the turn of the 20th century, which is their original building in Gothic revival, built with traditional materials, with traditional methods. It's still standing. It's still standing after 101 years in better condition than the building they put in 2 years ago. To me, that exposes the exact flaw where they built an ugly building versus a beautiful building, and which stands longer, the beautiful building. I think it stands to reason. Build beautiful buildings, build in a proper sense.
Well, aren't you?
They all throughout history looked lovely.
Is that because they're preserved more than...
Perhaps, but you preserve and you treat something better if it's beautiful. Why would you treat an ugly object, I suppose, to the same level of care and attention than something beautiful?
Well, so in terms of the SNP leadership election, who have you got your hopes on?
Well, as I said, Mrs. What was her name? Was it Ruden?
Regan.
Regan. Mrs. Regan. I would love to get in. She's to me, she's the Diane Abbott of the SNP. So I'd love to get her in, but at an all sensible level, I think the most competent leader out of that lot would be Kate Forbes.
Well, there you have it, folks.
Oliver, what about you?
I'm not too sure. I haven't really looked in depthly at
the diplomatic answer as ever.
The candidates. Well, I don't want to side with anyone at the moment, but anyway.
Well,
I think that'll be a good time to wrap up this week's episode. We've had an interesting discussion on a few various topics on this week's Politibabble, and we're hopefully going to be coming back next week with another interesting topic, or perhaps even a guest. Unfortunately, due to Archie on his adventures again, we may not be in the studio together, but we'll be back. And obviously, if you wanted to listen to last week's episode of Jason Morehouse MHK
highly recommend it.
His profile, we'd highly recommend it. So go to manxradio.com/podcasts/Politibabble, and in the meantime, you can email us at politibabble@gmail.com.
Or, of course, you can search for Politibabble, a Mr. Jason Morehouse MHK, a profile on your podcast platforms.
You've been
Politibabble.